welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we are doing on Sunday evening for me here in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, with Team USA on the first foreign stop on their tour towards the Olympics in Paris. And some 8,187 miles away in Las Vegas are the two guests I've got with me. First up, the guy who's been in Vegas for weeks on end, Tim Bontemps.
Well, we don't have Ben McMahon here because he's on vacation. And the biggest story in Vegas this weekend is that Brian Windhorst Bags never got out of the country. And everybody wants to know the latest update on where are Brian's clothes.
I don't think people want it. They don't really want to know.
Trust me. People in here in Vegas want to know.
I arrived in Abu Dhabi 3 days ago. My bag remains in the United States. And I know exactly where it is, because I've got an air tag on it. And this is one of those horror stories you read about and nobody wants to hear about. But I know exactly where it is, but the airlines can't seem to find it.
As Jackson correctly says, why would the airline do that? Why?
Well, maybe because it's in Dallas and they don't like me much in Dallas. Joining us from down the street is the machine in Vegas to document Summer League, Kevin Pelton.
You know, I don't know that they're that fond of me in Dallas either. So maybe it was a good thing I was originally supposed to connect through Dallas on my way to Bristol for the NBA draft show a couple weeks ago, but I ended up changing my plans. So maybe that was fortunate since my bag did make it.
Yeah. The only person more disliked than McMahon in Dallas among ESPN employees, the machine, Kevin Pelton.
It's never good when you want to when you lose your luggage. There's never a good time to lose your luggage. There's never a good time to lose your luggage for days and days and days on end. But when you're at the start of a 3-continent month-long trip, that's a rough one. All right. Well, I've been a big loser this week, but now we do you like that turn? We're going to
good. That's a professional segue, Brian.
Thank you. We're gonna talk about with the. I was talking to somebody today, a league executive, and he said, "Well, the offseason is over. Nobody's talking about anything right now. If you don't have your business done, it's not getting done." I'm sure it's an over-exaggeration. I'm sure we will see things. There's still a bunch of 2021 draft guys that have to get their extensions done. But
I feel like that's basically the vibe here in Vegas, though, don't you think, Kevin? Doesn't everybody sort of feel like it's over?
Yeah, the chatter has been about Gary Trent Jr., so we've reached a pretty deep part of the offseason.
Yes, I would agree.
Well, anyway, thought we'd take a look at with the offseason with a bow on it, some of the teams that came out winners and some of the teams came out losers. And the Knicks were already near the top. And then a couple of days ago, Jalen Brunson did what? I guess it wasn't shocking. Because this is the kind of thing that has been happening with the Knicks.
Well, it's also been talked about as a possibility literally for months also.
True, but it was still...
I'm not downplaying the importance. I'm just saying it wasn't shocking only because we've talked about it for...
Right.
I mean, that was my lead the other day, is it isn't shocking because of the fact that we've been talking about this, but it probably should be.
Well, I think
also should probably say what it is before we continue.
Yes. Jalen Brunson signed a 4-year, $157 million contract extension with the Knicks just about on the first day he was eligible to sign it, maybe a couple days later. And that was $37 million less than he could have made over the same stretch. And had he, if he'd waited, and what is the overall number if he had waited?
Well, the key way to explain it is if he had signed the full extension, he could have signed a year from now, or a full deal, he could have signed a year from now. He could have made $270 million over a 5-year deal and therefore sacrificed $113 million to sign this extension now at below the max by a lot of what he could do dollars wise and below the max what he could do years wise, which is obviously geared towards keeping this team together. And I think is certainly a secondary part of the transaction that was made a couple of weeks ago to trade for Mikal Bridges, the 4th member of the Nova Knicks. And I still maintain the 5th member of the Nova Knicks, who's been there before, Ryan Arcidiacono, will wind up back with the Knicks at some point. And, these guys have all clearly desire to play together. And by signing this extension under the new collective bargaining agreement, like we've talked about a bunch, this gives the Knicks the ability to have potentially a 5-year window where they are an elite championship level team with this group together, which is going to be really, really hard to do under this new CBA, which is why this is a big deal and why I saw a bunch of Knicks people yesterday, and every one of them, including a certain father, had a very big smile on their face about the way things have gone for the Knicks over the last few weeks.
You know, he does have an opt-out in the last year of that contract. He can opt out and sign for more, so that all the numbers are a little fuzzy. But the point is, he's really leaving a lot on the table, and there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that in 4 years that he will be able to get that kind of money. There's no guarantee. Now, Pelton, we have talked repeatedly over the years about how there's an intrinsic value to being a star on the Knicks. That if you are a star on the Knicks, you reap the rewards for the rest of your lifetime. Partially because there hasn't been a lot of bona fide stars on the Knicks, and partially because of the nature of the market and the nature of the fan base, and that nobody remembers how much Carmelo Anthony made, but he is regarded as an all-time Knick, and he continues to live off of that. But we're now pressing the limits of that, because this earning this back, like psychically, he can. It's one, you know, he can say winning is worth whatever. And, you know, I learned years ago never to count players' money. But I'll bet Jalen will be hearing from a lot of people in his life and people who come up alongside him, because one of the things about the NBA, one of the lessons learned is, you know, when the sun shines, you've got to take the money. And no matter how much it is, it could be more, and this is could be your one opportunity. So Jalen is doing this because he trusts the Knicks and because he wants to be in New York and all of those things. But it is still a huge outlier in the history of contracts, and the Knicks really now have a responsibility to Jalen. Not that, you know, they didn't already, but now they have responsibility to Jalen to really keep the gas down and make that sacrifice financially worth it.
Yeah, I mean, notably, Carmelo Anthony, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this, certainly, but he did take every penny when he got to New York and did so via trade.
He took a little bit. He took when he came to New York, but then he later signed a contract.
Or the second contract, yeah.
He later signed a contract where he took a little bit of a haircut.
But the story of Carmelo's career in general was at every point he made sure he maximized the money he could make, as opposed to maximizing the winning situation he could put himself in. Which it's not a criticism, but again, he took the other guys, the other guys from the banana boat, all were free agents in 2010, and he was a free agent in 2011 because he made sure he got the extra money. It's not a negative thing. It's just the story of how his career played out.
All of that is accurate, but I believe, to be fair, his last contract with the Knicks, he took a slight reduction to try to help them.
Yeah, I mean,
cap space.
Sure.
But
none of that's a criticism either. I could get all the money you can get. I'm not saying that, but it's just that's just the story of how Carmelo stuff played out.
Yes, and so that move is obviously, you know, and I think you've got it right, Bontemps. I think that move really is a conjunction and an extension of the Mikal Bridges trade. It's sort of in tandem, making all of that deal sort of wraps up into one. And then the thing about it is Bridges is eligible for an extension.
And he could sign a 2-year, for Bobby Marks, 2-year, $60 million extension in October, or he could sign a 4-year extension for, I think, somewhere around $120 million. I don't remember the exact number. Next summer, off of his current deal, which is seen as a below market deal. And I will be very surprised if at some point in the next calendar year, Mikal Bridges is not extended off of that current deal, because again, that's the precedent that's being set here by one of his best friends. And these guys all clearly want to play together, and this is helping them do that.
And I think it's important to point out that the contracts that are entered into this year, no matter what they are, these are going to end up being good contracts. And the reason is because the TV money is coming after this season. and they're going to phase that money in, and the cap is going to go up at least 30% in the next 3 years, and it might even go up a little bit more, and it might even go up 40% over the next 4 years. So guys who sign this summer and lock themselves into contracts, by the time they get to the end of these deals, they're going to probably be 30% ish discounts, even if they're still at the market. Even if they signed a market value deal in 2024, they're going to be 30% discounts in 3 years. So then you have Brunson, who took a below market deal, a significant below market deal. And so in 3 years, when he's getting towards the end of that contract, God knows what percentage he'll be below what his value is. So it's, and that's why it's such a home run, is that the Knicks' flexibility with building their team will remain open because the cap is going to grow and continue to give them flexibility. And if Bridges takes this same type of deal as well and doesn't become a unrestricted free agent like he can in a couple of years, the way Jalen made that decision, it just really amplifies the discount. So I know it's kind of, talking about money, talking about other players' money is complicated, but Pelton, it really puts the Knicks in position, and they've got all these draft picks still, and they still can improve this roster, which I think is a key point.
Yeah, they got a handful of other teams' draft picks. I mean, the value of those is debatable because, two of the picks that they have are maybe the only two outside picks they have are from Detroit and from Washington, and are protected in such a way that the Knicks may never get them. I think that Pistons pick in particular, because the protections, decline a little bit over time. And I do think at some point, even with a new lead executive in Trajan Langdon, they're going to feel the pressure to start winning and maybe give up a pick that's in the teens to New York. So they have some things to work out with. The cupboard isn't bare draft pick wise, even as much as they gave up for Mikal Bridges. But yeah, I mean, the big thing this allows them to do is next offseason, they can figure out Julius Randle's situation, assuming, he's not quite a 30% max at this stage of his career. They can
also eligible for an extension right now, just for clear, just to say you could do something with them now too.
Yep, they could do that right now and lock that in, and potentially use the taxpayer mid-level exception next summer and still stay under that second apron. See, the second apron is going to be a clock on teams because of the way that the draft picks get frozen and eventually move to the end of the round. Our expectation is it's probably going to be 2 years you're going to spend in that second apron, and then you're going to be trying to get out so your draft pick doesn't move to the end of the round. So New York, that clock would start for them in all likelihood in 2026-27, when Bridges is starting that potential extension, and not next season. So that's an extra year. It's not until 2028-29 that they have to worry about the harshest implications of the second apron. So I'd say it's a 4-year window right now, and that will still be expensive. So that's where, in terms of taking care of Brunson and, matching his commitment, the Knicks are going to be paying a lot of luxury tax for this team, but not necessarily dealing with the harshest second apron ramifications.
I guess their play is to sort of outmaneuver the Celtics financially because they're behind them talent-wise, but they can outmaneuver the Celtics financially. I had a light moment today with Jason Tatum. He was talking about welcoming Derrick Rose to Team USA camp. I'm sorry, you're right, Derrick White. You're right. I had a light moment with Jason Tatum today, who was welcoming his Celtics teammate Derrick White to Team USA practice. He arrived at 2:30 in the morning on Sunday morning here in Abu Dhabi and was on the practice court by about 10:30. And he's like, he's a max player now. He's like, last time I saw him was at the parade, and in the time I haven't seen him, he's become a max player because Derek signed what his max is, a 4-year, $126 million contract. And I said, Jason, Derek is not a max player. You, sir, are a max player because he has literally almost 2.5 times bigger max contract. And Jason couldn't stop from smiling on that one. I kind of had him on that. So, but the Celtics, there's 3 Celtics here, all of them are under long-term contract. And with Jason Tatum, Drew Holiday, and Derrick White, all of them have just signed within the last few months. And there's controversy that a fourth guy isn't here in Jalen Brown, whose contract is a year old. And when you look at the Knicks, all their guys are kind of going to be freshly signed. But the difference is the cost of the Knicks versus the cost of the Celtics is hugely different. And so if you're the Knicks, yeah, you're believing that Team Nova will bond together and play together, but it's also a bet that your finances and your structure will, be able to live longer. And, there's some uncertainty with the Celtics because they're for sale. So I do think that that's, one thing to look at. It's unfortunate, but reality that's what team building is about. It used to kind of be more like, well, who can guard the 2-3s? Who's going to be the stretch 4? Can this point guard play combo guard, whatever? And that's still there, but you now have to worry about how all of those guys really fit in. And it's, it's not so much how big your payroll is. Paying tax is only part of the deal. It's all the new penalties. So we're learning that, and that's one of the reasons why New York was a big winner. But the OG Anunoby contract, not as good, Pelton. Like all the discounts that they got on this, they paid a premium for OG Anunoby, and I don't blame him. But he got the those other guys took the Nova discount. He got the premium.
Yeah, I mean, he had the leverage of the fact that he was, a free agent this year. If Philly hadn't gotten Paul George, probably would have been their number one target and would have been a reasonable candidate for them to even throw a max at, I think, potentially in that scenario. And so he got slightly less than his max from the Knicks, but he is going to be the highest paid player on this team, ahead of Brunson, which is kind of interesting given their respective spots in the pecking order. And I guess speaks again to the leverage he had. But I think you had to do it for the Knicks. From the Knicks standpoint, I don't agree with you that you can't sign a bad contract this offseason, because I remember a lot of people saying that in the summer of 2016, and many of those contracts aged quite poorly for guys who, even though that the cap.
Oh, you can
so
sign a
higher.
bad contract any year. I'm just saying these players will be viewed as discounts.
Well,
Maybe
yes.
not every single one.
The way you phrased it was that every contract is a good contract. I had the same thought as Pelton, as you were saying.
Okay, well, I take it all back. I take it all back.
Your point in the aggregate was accurate. It's just you could still sign players to bad deals. That's all. Definitely a lot of deals are going to age well.
But that contract, I think, is going to be fine going forward, again, in the context of these other discounts that they've had. And, I think the most interesting question with the Knicks is how much are they going to miss Isaiah Hartenstein and everything that he provided them on the offensive glass, as a passer from the front court. You've got Mitchell Robinson.
They're still looking for another big. They're still looking for another big out there.
Precious Achiuwa is unsigned. Seems very likely that he will be going back to the Knicks as their backup center. But I would have liked their offseason maybe slightly more if they could have gotten a discount backup center. Andre Drummond was someone who was mentioned. He ended up going to Philly. So that's, I think, the one question mark out there. I had an interesting hypothetical posed to me. Would you rather, for this Knicks team, as it's constituted right now, have Julius Randle or Isaiah Hartenstein? Setting aside
Hartenstein for sure. I think the Knicks would rather have with the team they have now. I mean,
funny thing is,
have the team they had in the playoffs, except you'd have Mikal Bridges on it, and that, I think they would take that based off how they're spread out.
I'm pretty sure that Hartenstein's making more money than Randle.
He definitely is.
Yeah.
It's very slightly more. Yeah. He's making $30 million this season to start his contract.
Yeah.
Randle's at 29.
Yeah.
Well, who would have thought that a year ago?
Yes.
I mean, I talked to Isaiah earlier this year when he was really taken off, and I said, how many teams offered you a contract when you were a free agent 2 years ago? He said 2. I assume was the Clippers and the Knicks.
Yeah, the Clippers wanted him back, and then the Knicks signed him.
Yeah. And the Knicks got him for less than the mid-level, or maybe it was about the mid-level.
No, it was less. He bounced around. I mean, he played for Cleveland. He played for Houston. The Clippers signed him on a cheap deal. I mean, it's a cool story the way he's improved and cashed in. He's not. We'll talk about him in a bit.
Okay, a couple of other pretty obvious winners from the offseason. Philadelphia 76ers. They signed the biggest free agent, getting Paul George. And Bontemps, you like the way they spent the rest of their money and filled out the rest of their roster?
Yeah, I mean, look, as I've said a bunch of times, we can't guarantee that Philly's going to win the title because of how this summer went. But if you look at the probability range of outcomes on how this went, it went about as well as it possibly could have. They get Paul George, obviously the only real max free agent on the market, who's a perfect fit with Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid. They get Caleb Martin for half the money he could have gotten if he'd taken the extension that was on the table in Miami. Very good fit for them. They get Andre Drummond, who Kevin mentioned earlier. The Knicks had interest in, other teams had interest in. He's a very good backup center, gives them a good innings eater behind Joel Embiid. They get Eric Gordon for a minimum, solid deal. They get Kelly Oubre back. We had a great year last year on a minimum for Philly. One of the bigger surprises of the season, frankly, I thought, was the way he fit in there and played really well. And a very big move for them over the weekend, right after we finished the pod the other day, getting Kyle Lowry back on a minimum. I was curious to see how this negotiation would go, if they would be able to get Kyle back. I think he's going to be a really important piece for them, both in the locker room and on the court. He obviously is towards the latter part of his career at this point, but showed he had a lot left in the tank when he came over from Miami after being traded to Charlotte last year in the Terry Rozier deal. Played well for them down the stretch and in the playoffs. And I think as a guy coming off the bench as a key reserve for them, really important to get him done. And you look at, last year, Derek Jones and Oubre both signed in August. There's going to be more players that are probably going to land on minimum deals later this summer. Philly's going to be at the front of the line for a lot of those players. And they should be able to get some guys help. And the other thing that happened, Josh Okogie and Eric Gordon both signed 2-year, $60 million contracts with non-guaranteed second years, both of them as trade chips. I think there was some consternation with the league about how those went. But the bottom line is both those guys are eligible to get those contracts. Well,
consternation because it's not consternation for those guys who probably got overpaid.
Correct.
They become human trade exceptions.
Yes, the league. I don't know if the league was super thrilled about having them be human trade exceptions, but it's perfectly reasonable and it's great for those guys. And now both
the union's
teams,
not going to complain. The union is quite happy to have role players get paid like that.
It's a zero harm. It's a zero harm situation, other than owners paying more money, which I'm not going to have any issue with. So now they have a guy. Now they have some more ability to add via trade, and they have they got a bunch of draft picks to move. So they're about as good a shape as they could be. And see if their guys are healthy. We'll see what it looks like on the court. But compared to where I thought it was going to be back in February, when I didn't think they were getting Paul George and I wasn't really sure how this was going to go, like I thought they might be able to spread their money around and get a few solid players. And I certainly didn't think they'd be bereft of talent, but
good work.
To get the best player on the market, to add depth around them, I think it's gone about as good as it could have.
It's a good thing you was bereft. Well, McMahon wasn't here to complain about that particular.
Well, it would have been his vocab word of the day. We give him a vocab word of the day every pod. KP, you know that.
Now, you did say Eric Gordon. That was KJ Martin who signed that 2-year, $16 million deal. And
sorry.
The Sixers were able to take advantage of the fact that because he was on a minimum contract before that he had signed as a second-round pick with Houston, his cap hold is a free agent, unrestricted, was at the minimum. So they could still fit him in, use all this cap space to bring in the guys that they did. They split that up amongst PG, Drummond, Caleb Martin, and then re-sign KJ Martin, use the room exception on Oubre, minimum for Lowry and Gordon. It's going to be a masterclass, I think, on how to kind of maximize your cap space. It will be expensive, as you alluded to. I think it's going to be kind of fascinating because it looks like Philly has a chance to be in the luxury tax while using cap space, which is something that almost never happens. Cleveland pulled it off the summer that they brought LeBron back and then used Brendan Haywood's non-guaranteed contract to create a trade exception that they eventually got Timofey Mozgov in that year. But it's a team, I think, is the important thing. Like these pieces do fit really well together, despite the fact that you had these complications of kind of being limited by the market. And that's why getting Paul George was so crucial, because he fills a lot of holes. I mean, you do still have some questions. They don't have much size in the front court. It's probably going to be Caleb Martin at 6'6" is their starting power forward as you pencil things out right now. But that's a spot that they could look to address if they trade KJ Martin or using some minimum signings. And this is going to be I think this has a chance to be the best Sixers team of the Joel Embiid era.
I would agree with that. And just really quick, they are definitely going to be in the luxury tax after the moves they have made.
Okay, we mentioned Isaiah Hartenstein a little bit ago. Oklahoma City with some moves to improve their team. They came out and had probably a top 5, 6 move, top 10 move, whatever, right out of the gates with trading for Alex Caruso, and then they add Hartenstein, and they don't really lose a lot there. They traded Josh Giddey, but he didn't fit great. And Hartenstein they signed with cap space. They don't have to use any of their draft picks. They're a winner, Pelton.
Without question, I think they had the best offseason of any team. I mean, Philadelphia, obviously, like relative to their position, Philadelphia came in the best position because they had the most cap space, and I think they did great work with it. But I think Oklahoma City, to keep the core of this group intact, to not give up any draft picks whatsoever. Then the other thing they were able to do is decline the team options on Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, bring them back on contracts that are going to descend over the course of them, gives them a lot of flexibility as they start navigating the contract extensions that are coming for Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams. And then after that, a supermax for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But they had this window where those guys were unusually cheap, were being paid less than what they are producing. And they took advantage of it to add one of the most impactful free agents to change teams. And then also in Caruso, just a terrific fit. So I think this is clearly the favorites in the Western Conference at this point.
And we've talked about this a bunch. Getting 2 elite role players to fill in around their guys. The young guys are all going to get better. I'm with you, Kevin. To me, the best bet on the board right now from a league-wide perspective is betting Oklahoma City to win the West. Like, their team should have, obviously, knock on wood from their standpoint, from a health standpoint, but they're young. There's no reason to expect them to have injuries, and they're deep, they're versatile, they can play a lot of ways. They've gotten significantly better, and frankly, a lot of the competition at the top of the West has taken a step back in different ways. So I love the way the Thunder's offseason went, and I think obviously, it goes without saying, they've got an extraordinarily bright future.
You guys both, when we talked about this, had under the radar winners, both Western Conference teams. Bontemps, why don't you tell us who your kind of under the radar winner is?
It's going to be polite and let the machine go first, but I'll be quick. I think the Warriors, one of the big winners of the summer. Obviously, Klay Thompson leaving is a disappointing thing as somebody who's a neutral basketball fan and has spent a lot of time around the Warriors and really likes Klay and would have liked that situation to work out differently. But I think Klay is in a good situation for him personally in Dallas, the way that went. And I love what the Warriors did. Turning Klay Thompson into Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson, and DeAnthony Melton. I think they unquestionably got better. And I think Mike Dunleavy did a really good job. The roster's deeper. I think if DeAnthony's back is healthy, obviously a critical thing. We talked about a lot last season with Philly. But if his back is right, I bet he's their starting 2. He can guard 1s and 2s, and he's a really good shooter. Like, he's basically Gary Payton, except he can actually be a consistent 3-point threat. And then you got Buddy Hield, who could do a lot of the stuff Klay Thompson did. He's one of the best shooters in the league. He'll be coming off the bench for them in sort of the role they wanted Klay to play. So I think that'll be good. And Kyle Anderson playing in the Steve Kerr offense with motion and, using his high basketball IQ. He also, the fact that he'll have the ball, takes away some of the issues with him. But from a shooting perspective, he can run the point when Steph isn't out there. I really think they got better. I think there's a real chance, assuming, again, health for Steph in particular, and if Draymond Green can stay on the court, I think there's a real chance they're a top 4 team in the West next year.
Pelton, you're under the radar winner.
Yeah, I don't think there's a chance they're a top 4 team in the West. And I think eventually the discussion about them got to no, not saying Golden State. I'm saying my winner.
Oh. I thought we were going to have another potential bet on our hands on the pod.
No, my winner is not realistically going to get in the top four. And I thought that eventually the conversation between the two Tims got to a good place with a line of 35.5 for them. I guess we should look up what their actual line is if those are out yet. I don't know.
I'm looking up right now.
Was that where we set? Was that negotiated off the pod?
Nothing. No. I said 36.5 because McMahon said up to 44 and I said around 30 and he got very angry. So it never got
you were both a little extreme. But okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know there was a number agreed to, Pelton. So
I was just saying that was the proposal.
Yeah.
Okay.
It wasn't.
And those lines are not yet out from the odds makers quite yet. But San Antonio, I really like what they did in terms of being more competitive next season, getting a better idea, I think, of where they are with Victor in year two. Bontemps last week was a little skeptical of how much Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes would actually help them win. And my counterpoint to that was the important thing is not necessarily how good they are at their stage of their career, although, I think they both certainly can still help and that Barnes might have trade value down the line, a la the Kurt Thomas pair of trades with the Sonics back in 2007 that has come up repeatedly on this podcast. But the thing is really more the guys that they are replacing. And San Antonio's point guard rotation outside of Trey Jones was so weak last season. I think it helped hold Victor back. And, not only do they have Chris Paul there, the other interesting thing that's happened, Stephon Castle had a bit of a slow debut at the California Classic. He was terrific on Saturday in his first game here in Las Vegas, going up against his former UConn teammate, Donovan Clingan, was the best player on the court, shot the three, looked really well, looked really comfortable shooting it. That's obviously the biggest question about, his future. But, if he is the number 4 pick is able to help right away. And I think the comparison that I had watching him was a bit like watching Cason Wallace last year, wasn't taken as high, but another guy where we knew the defensive chops were there. The question was about, his shooting ability. And
everybody, you bring up Castle and just the first word everybody in the league says shooting.
Right. Yeah. So if he can shoot even a little bit, he's going to help them, I think, as a rookie because of everything else he can do. I really liked him as a prospect, despite the fact that, those questions existed about his shooting. So, I think this is a team that has a chance to take a solid step forward. But then the other element of why they're a winner is they've continued adding to these draft picks that they can trade down the road. The next big star that comes available. I don't know if you've heard San Antonio would be a good place for a star to end up.
What's funny is that they're still kicking the ball down the field with the Kawhi Leonard trade because the assets that they got from Toronto ended up trading. Remember Jakob Poeltl was in the deal where they traded Leonard. They traded Poeltl back for a draft pick. That draft pick turned into the 8th pick this year. They traded the 8th pick, which was Rob Dillingham, to Minnesota for a pick and a swap. So they, believe it or not, still have the Kawhi Leonard IOU still rolling it down the field. So
more than that, because they also still have a first round pick from Chicago via the DeMar DeRozan sign and trade, the first DeMar DeRozan sign and trade.
That's true.
Yes,
somehow they have ended up getting first swap in this case, but getting the best asset in both DeMar DeRozan sign and trades.
It's rather amazing work on both ends, and I do think the Spurs were definitely a winner of the offseason for the way they comported themselves across the board. And I think they'll be better. I just think that in our excitement and exuberance about where Victor is headed, which is all justified because he is awesome. I saw Kenny Atkinson this weekend, who's coaching the French national team, and he is awed by Victor, as is everybody else. It's just very rare that teams take a 15+ win jump year over year, particularly in a conference as deep and loaded as this Western Conference, where you could argue that, including the Spurs, I think there's 13 teams that realistically can make an argument that they could wind up in the top 10 next season. So that's all my stance is on where the Spurs are at.
Over the course of the year, we talk hundreds of hours on this pod and, hundreds more hours off the pod. And we all take positions. We all sort of have positions. They're sometimes shifting. And Bontemps' position on Victor is just, it remains where it's at. He loves Victor. I think he's a good player, but he's holding that ceiling down. I'm the opposite. I say no ceiling shall be
I'm not
placed on
holding,
Victor
no,
Wembanyama.
I'm not holding the ceiling down. I
I'm
think
not
he's going to be
making
the
an
best player in the
accusation.
NBA. I just
I'm
think
not making an accusation.
I'm only pointing out.
This is your position. You've taken this position.
He's holding expectations down.
Yes, the Spurs are. I don't think the Spurs are going to win four. I mean, again, McMahon the other day, this all began because McMahon declared the Spurs could win 44 games, literally double their win total. That basically never happens. Maybe it will happen. I just think if you're guessing on what's likely to happen, it's unlikely they will double their win total. I do,
Okay.
but I agree with Kevin. It's been a heck of an offseason for them. And the thing that's been most impressive about it, I think, is they have been consistently planning for the future over the last 12 months or so and making solid moves that give them long-term, smart flexibility with draft picks, with draft capital, with salary. Like they put themselves in a really great spot going forward. And, the Spurs, plenty of good reasons to be a Spurs fan for a long time. And certainly looks like there's going to be plenty of good reasons to be a Spurs fan for a long time.
Pelton, watch how much Bontemps enjoys this statement. Because I have a rule about no slings on Victor Wembanyama, all I would say is I would never, watch this hedge, I would never bet the under. I'm not saying I would bet the over on the Spurs, but I would never bet the under. All right,
we made a pod where there's only one person who makes predictions, Kevin. That's all.
I mean, I'm on today. I'm happy to make predictions.
I know you are.
Right.
You have some gumption.
All right, we don't want to call them losers. We just want to call them not winners.
I'll call them losers.
Okay, right on brand for both of us. Bontemps, your loser that you are prepared to brand here in the offseason.
The Chicago Bulls, just a horrible offseason for them. I mean, they wait too long to trade Alex Caruso. They then trade him for Josh Giddey. We've talked about that ad nauseum. Didn't like that trade. They do this DeMar DeRozan sign and trade, as Kevin mentioned in the pod earlier. Harrison Barnes, decent player. They don't get him. They don't get the first round pick swap in the trade. Like, what are we doing here with the Bulls?
They had the asset in the trade.
They had the asset in the trade and they got nothing back, and the Spurs got all the stuff. I mean, it's just their mismanagement across the board the past couple of years has been really sort of shocking. And the Caruso, the process with the Caruso deal, keeping him and DeRozan on this team where the team wasn't going anywhere during the season. They easily could have turned them into stuff at the trade deadline, probably got a lot for him. Instead, they don't do anything with him. They signed Zach LaVine for a ton of money earlier. There's now no market to move him anywhere. They're stuck with him. They've had a brutal offseason, and it doesn't, I mean, I guess the one positive is they're probably going to be right smack in the middle of the race for a top pick in what's a loaded draft, because they're not going to be good. But the fact that they got there in this manner is not the most encouraging thing, I would say, if you're a Bulls fan, to put it mildly.
All right, Pelton, you're a loser.
I mean, I think you have to say the LA Clippers. Look, I sort of understand how they got to this position and that they feel that, the rug was kind of pulled out from them with the second apron rules coming in. But, they still could have had a window to re-sign Paul George, give him the same deal that they gave Kawhi Leonard, and, have this 2-year window in the tax on the James Harden contract that they re-signed him to, then or in the second apron, I should say, then sort of reevaluate after that and not deal with having your draft pick move to the end of the round. And instead they chose to just, duck entirely out of the luxury tax. I think at this point, they give up Paul George, who, clearly would have had value on a max contract, trade value, would maybe have taken a no trade clause that could have limited that to a degree. But I don't think this was a Bradley Beal contract because, Paul George is still such a coveted player and fits so well everywhere. So letting him walk to Philly for nothing, not even, a trade exception via sign-in trade, I think is a disappointment without question. I didn't necessarily dislike the moves that they did make. I thought pretty good value on Derek Jones Jr. coming off the season, that he had last year, like bringing back Nicola Batum. But, the ultimate question is kind of for who, for what is the ceiling on this team, especially, unfortunately.
I love a for who, for what reference.
Yes. One of my favorite quotes, the great Ricky Waters, Seahawks legend. but what is the ceiling for this team, especially with Kawhi Leonard's health again in question after he was forced to withdraw from USA basketball? They really need him healthy now, because if it's not him, James Harden is the only guy that they have as a reliable creator of offense.
All right. I'm here in Abu Dhabi. I'm going to be seeing Nikola Jokic playing against Team USA on Wednesday. I'll see him then in France. They just had a very impressive, it was a friendly, but they had a very impressive win over France in France earlier on the weekend. I don't ever want to, there's certain teams I never feel are desperate. And I think if you've got Nikola Jokic in his prime, he's not you're not desperate. But the Nuggets took a step back, I think, in this offseason. And the interesting thing will be their next moves. So they obviously lost Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And they didn't have their backup plan basically for KCP is to play their young players. The problem is that Michael Malone, he doesn't seem to really love their young players, because as the season went along last year, he just stopped playing them. He pulled Peyton Watson in and out of the lineup. He didn't play Julian Strother all the time. He didn't play Jalen Pickett. He wanted to play, Justin Holiday. Like, he was playing Justin Holiday over some of these young guys because he preferred the veteran. And basically, because of finances and because Calvin Booth wants Michael Malone to play the young guys, he's basically saying, play these young guys. This is what I'm giving you, play them. And I'm not sure how it's going to go. I don't know how these young guys will do, forced to play rotation minutes and forced to fill the role of KCP. And they've got a Aaron Gordon contract extension that they've got to handle this offseason if they're smart. And they've, I don't know what kind of message they're sending to Jamal Murray, not sign him to his contract before playing for Team Canada. I get it. I get, in a vacuum, it makes sense. But what message does that send to your franchise point guard who's a champion? It's interesting here. So many people in Abu Dhabi are big fans of the NBA and big fans of Man City, because basically the government of Abu Dhabi owns Man City football. And already people who've talked to me here about the Nuggets, because Jokic is in town, they bring up Man City because one of their big rivals is Arsenal, also owned by Stan Kroenke, and the way he operates spending with Arsenal is the way they're seeing the Nuggets operate with spending now. And so they're a smart organization. Calvin Booth is already proven to be a strong executive. Michael Malone's proven to be an excellent coach. They have ability to move out of this, but considering the competitiveness in the West and that Jokic is in his prime, I don't think you ever want to be put on the loser or potential loser list. So they did sign Dario Saric. They got him to a decent number. They signed him to the taxpayer mid-level exception, but that was their move. Their move was to sign a backup big man. Their move wasn't to add wing depth, which, they need. Because again, it's very clear Calvin Booth wants to force Michael Malone into using those guys he's drafted. And I've been around a long time. I've seen this happen many times over the years where a general manager wants to force a coach to play his draft picks. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it don't. And so I'm just going to say, we're just going to keep an eye on that. So, and also they got a terrible break this week. I didn't know if Deron Holmes was going to actually contribute to them, who they drafted in the first round, but they obviously valued him a lot because they don't have a lot of extra assets and they used some to trade up to get him. And then he tore his Achilles this week.
Well, their promise to him got out in the league to such a degree that they had to trade up and get him because everybody knew that they valued him in the draft. And he tore his Achilles in his first game. And we talked about it a bunch. Not keeping the best starting five, arguably in the league, together when it's simply what seemingly is either a money decision from Stan Kroenke, or it's Calvin Booth just didn't think he was worth doing it.
Well, and here's the thing. If you go into the second apron, you're mostly limited in your team building. But this team is built.
Correct.
So, that's the thing. Like you're basically just doing it for monetary reasons. So,
or Calvin Booth just didn't think it was worth having him on the team regardless. But I mean,
Calvin Booth wants Peyton Watson and Christian Brown and Julian Strother and Jaden Pickett to play. That's what he wants.
And as we've talked about, they better win, because you got Nikola Jokic on your team in his prime, and you're losing key players off the team, what you could have kept, and there was nothing stopping you from doing so. It's not great.
You have any comments, Pelton?
Yeah, I mean, Saric becomes more important with that Deron Holmes injury, and they agreed to that deal beforehand. So presumably they were expecting, I think, him to play over Deron Holmes II this season. But
well, their big signing last year was Zeke Naji, and it's not a vote of confidence in Zeke Naji that you signed Dario Saric instead of a wing. I'm sorry to keep going back to that, but
no, but I mean, McMahon's brought up a bunch. It's true. And the other thing, just because we've bounced around on a few things, I think a couple teams that have had a bit of a disappointing offseason, not through necessarily any fault of their own, is the Lakers and the Bucks, just from the standpoint that because of where those two teams are, they did not have a lot of ability to do a lot with their teams. And you look at the East, the way these teams in the East have leveled up, and obviously Boston's coming off winning the title, and you look at the way these teams and the way things have maneuvered around in the West, certainly in the area that the Lakers are in, it's going to be difficult, I think, for both of those teams to end up in the same spots they were last year.
Well, the Bucks have to hope that minimum signings hit. DeLon Wright and Taurean Prince, like they're relying on those guys. That when you rely on minimum guys, you often get spotty results, but you sometimes also hit a grand slam. And so they let Malik Beasley go. They couldn't afford to pay him. They didn't let him go. They lost him. And say whatever you want. That guy made a lot of threes for them last year. So when you have to keep relying on these minimum guys, and nobody knows that more than the Lakers. The Lakers are moving on from Taurean Prince, and that's who the Bucks, although Prince was above the minimum, but yeah. So do you have any under the radar losers there, Pelton?
Yeah, I would say I didn't really love Detroit's offseason. One of the questions you hear during Summer League is, we didn't. Part of the reason Denver is now out of draft picks is they had to send 3 of their second rounders to Charlotte to get them to take on Reggie Jackson, who was only making, I think, about $5.5 million. Detroit took on $16.5 million in Tim Hardaway Jr. and sent back Quentin Grimes to the Dallas Mavericks and got 3 second-round picks. Now, I think those second-round picks are maybe a little more attractive, and some of those Denver ones are contingent on other trades and Denver conveying first-round picks. But still, for Quentin Grimes to have that little trade value after he was kind of the core piece in the Bojan Bogdanovic, Alec Burks trade with New York is a disappointment, and one of those cases where I think you change executives midstream and then someone else comes in with a different valuation on the players that the old regime had just acquired.
Pelton, we're kind of doing this in midstream. There's games going to be played in Summer League after we record this pod, but first couple days of Summer League, what's your takeaway, highs and lows?
Yeah, I think that the top 4 picks all looked really good in their debuts is the first thing I'd say. Zachary Risacher and Alex Sarr going against each other as the number 1 and number 2 picks. I thought Risacher showed a little more, juice off the dribble than I was expecting. Some really strong moves with his left hand. Sarr was very impressive defensively, a little quieter offensively. It's tough for bigs in Summer League, but did knock down a pair of threes off the dribble. That's, kind of showing that exciting offensive upside that he has. The number 3 pick, Reed Shepherd, was probably the standout of the first couple of days. His shooting is expected, got where he wanted on the court. I had a scout compare him to Mark Price, which I think is an interesting, and
wow,
that would be an amazing. That's obviously a best.
Price was not that athletic. I don't, I mean, especially after he blew his ACL, but okay.
True, but another guy who really thrived with his shooting.
But it's a shorter guy. Price was 6'1".
Mark Price is also a heck of a player. That if he showed up in today's NBA, he would have been a monster. So like if Reed Shepherd,
Mark Price was a first team. Fairly certain Mark Price made first, maybe second team All NBA. Maybe he made first team All NBA.
I'm pretty sure he did. I'm going to look it up right now. But that'd be a heck of an outcome.
Yeah, I mean that's again a really good outcome for the Rockets, and we already talked about Castle.
He's a 4-time All-Star, first team All-NBA 93, 3-time third team All-NBA player. So 4-time All-NBA. He's a heck of a player.
Yeah,
led Cleveland to some conference finals against Chicago, and then Dalton Connect.
You're dipping into my childhood here.
Oh, I'm well aware. Dalton Connect, I thought also was really impressive in his debut here for the Lakers. He'd also played in the California Classic. but I think was the leading scorer in that game with Reed Shepherd. And I thought showed some playmaking off the, his ability to find teammates off the dribble that was exciting. We know about the shooting, and then held up defensively pretty well.
All right. Well, we'll be talking more about both Team USA and Summer League as the week goes on. We are switching up our schedule a little bit. We're going to reduce back to 2 podcasts a week from 3. But somehow I think McMahon and Bontemps will still get their takes off. Thank you to Adrian and Jackson, our producers. Thank you to Pelton and Bontemps for stopping by. Thank you for watching and listening to the Hoop Collective. We'll talk to you soon.